Welcome to another episode of Positive Solutions for Life. This is Peggy Meyer. Today's guest is Christi Gmyr. Christi has worked in community mental health settings for nearly 10 years in therapist and management positions roles before opening her own private practice. After the birth of her first child, Christi quickly learned just how hard it was to juggle the challenges of parenthood with a demanding career. This was exacerbated when her second child was born at the beginning of COVID shutdown, bringing about its own unique set of difficulties. Since then, Christi has transitioned into coaching, where she uses what she learned through personal experience and her work as a therapist to help other stressed out moms with demanding careers overcome burnout, resentment, and guilt so they can be confident at home and feel more connected to their spouse and kids. Welcome to the podcast, Christi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad that you are able to join me today and to have a wonderful conversation about moms working, trying to, handle all these things. So with that, can you start the conversation by just sharing just a little bit more about you, your journey, and how it has led to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you already sort of mentioned in my bio, I am a mental health therapist. I've been in the mental health field for several years, probably close to 15 years at this point. And after I graduated from graduate school, I went into working in a community mental health agency. At that point, I did not have kids. And so it was very busy, but I was managing it, and I was doing therapy. Eventually, I transitioned into management, and with management, I was doing traveling and all these sorts of things. And it was a lot, but as I mentioned, I was managing it. Then fast forward, I don't even remember exactly how many years it was, but I had my daughter. And then I just don't feel like I was mentally prepared for it the way that I thought I would be. I think that there were so many things that suddenly I was struggling with and dealing with that nobody really told me about, that I wasn't really prepared for mentally, things that I just wasn't expecting. And so, everything from, the challenges around coming back after my maternity leave, the emotional struggles with that, and guilt around using daycare. I'm really the first person in my family to use daycare. I come from a family with lots of stay-at-home mothers, and so this was a very new thing. And so feeling guilt around that, and just all of these, I was trying to exclusively breastfeed, and so I was pumping during the day, and all these sorts of challenges that it just everything suddenly became very, very hard. So I eventually decided to transition out of the agency into private practice. I felt like there was more flexibility and things like that. And then COVID happened, and that was around the time that I had my second child. And so that was hard, but in an entirely different way. I thought that I was going to have my daughter at daycare and have this nice time with just him. And suddenly, and I'm talking like he was born at the very, very, very beginning of the shutdown. So suddenly I had this 4-year-old home with me while I was trying to juggle the challenges of having a newborn. And it was just very hard. And then on top of that, my kids, they get sick a lot. As I'm sure, as I know a lot of working moms experience the stress of dealing with like sick children.
Mhm.
And so I really sort of dealt with all of these things. And between that and also working as a therapist, with a lot of other moms, I really learned a lot of like strategies. I learned a lot of ways to really sort of manage these things.
Mhm.
And so now I am trying to pay it forward. I'm trying to help other moms and support other moms who are going through, their own versions of these very similar kinds of things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I so can relate. I didn't tell you I have 6 kids of my own, and now I'm thinking about how my oldest is will have her first child in the spring, and I'm just like, oh, what are all those struggles that I, have forgotten about because that's been like eons ago, she's 28. And I'm like, and you're just like you're fresh in it. So, you mentioned some of those challenges of, like, oh, daycare and nursing and just like all these responsibilities. What do you think were like some of the ones that were the most challenging that like nobody would tell you? Because I'm thinking like all these like mom guilt stuff. Like
Mhm.
that's what I kind of turn to.
Yeah.
But tell me like
Well,
what was some of those things that were like unforeseen and nobody told you?
so I had already sort of mentioned it a minute ago, but the guilt with daycare. So one of the things that I really did not realize is just how early newborns go to bed. Their sleep schedules are all over the place at the beginning. And And when my daughter was really, really young, she was going to bed at 6 o'clock, maybe 6:30 at night. And I worked 45 minutes away. And so a lot of times I was dropping her off at daycare at 7 in the morning. I wasn't getting home until 5, maybe 5:30 at night. And that was the time that I really wanted to be able to
Yeah.
spend with her. And suddenly she was going right to bed. And that was something that I just was not expecting. And
Mhm.
so I really felt a lot of guilt around that. And then there were other things with daycare that brought up those kinds of feelings too.
Yeah.
But that was definitely a surprise for me. I was not expecting or prepared for that.
Well, that's interesting because it's like that was a spin on like, like sleep when your baby sleeps, that like kind of thing. But then it's like, I want to spend time with my new child. And
Hmm.
it's like, where do I find that time if I'm working all day and they go to bed? Like, that's a new spin. Like, I hadn't
Hmm.
really thought of it in that way before because a lot of times it's like, oh, we're all, sleep deprived. So,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's another whole nother, set of challenges of operating on sleep
Mhm.
deprivation. But
Well, and I will say, like, one of the things that I found, my children were terrible sleepers. My daughter didn't sleep through the night until she was about 15 months old. My son until he was 2. It was just they were very, very terrible sleepers, which of course makes everything harder. Everything just feels more manageable when you're well rested.
Mhm.
But that was also something that was it was really outside of my control. Like I couldn't change it. And so I really had to do a lot of mindset work around coping with that. And one of the things that I found is that, maybe I wasn't able to spend that time with my daughter the way that I wanted to when we got home from when we got back at the end of the day. But I found a new appreciation in being up with her at night. Suddenly that sort of became our time together. Of course, I wanted my sleep and I was concerned about the impact on the next day, but also I tried to sort of see the positive in that, and that was our time together.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you bring that up because we do can make those little shifts in the mindset that really can make a difference in how we approach a situation, but how we also can handle like, okay, being up in the middle of the night isn't the best thing. Like I don't think anybody really enjoys like getting up in the middle of the night, spending it with their kids. But if you make it that, oh, this is our time,
Mhm.
everything else is quiet,
Yeah.
then it almost then kind of casts a more positive light on it and you can kind of like lessen the sleep deprivation effects.
Yeah, and I also, just really tried to focus on just sort of accepting that it was outside of my control. And one of the things that I think is really important to realize is accepting something doesn't necessarily mean you have to like it or to agree with it. But I have memories of, being up with my daughter in the middle of the night, looking over at the clock. It might be, 3 o'clock in the morning, and thinking about what is work going to be like for me tomorrow. But then instead of like really sort of stressing and panicking about it, instead I would just work on sort of accepting it. And I would say to myself, this is part of having a newborn. This is something that I was told would happen, and this is just kind of comes along with it. This whole thing is temporary. Tomorrow is one day. It might be a difficult day, but I will get through it. And then we'll try again tomorrow. And regardless of what happens tomorrow, the newborn stage is temporary. And
Mhm.
so I just really sort of focused on acceptance, really, because I couldn't change it.
Yeah. I mean, and focusing on the facts, really. I mean, newborn stage, temporary. They're going to go through
Yeah.
that pretty quickly.
Yes.
That stage of life, you're looking back at it now and you're like, oh, wow, that went really fast, probably. In the
Hmm.
moment, it seemed like, oh my gosh, that 3 o'clock in the morning seemed to drag on forever. But it is those little, when we talk about mindset shifts, that's just talking to ourselves just a little bit differently.
Hmm.
And I really like the point that accepting doesn't mean that you agree with it or that you like it. Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people think accept means I agree.
Hmm.
And it doesn't. It just
Right.
means that, hey, you just are reality here. This is
Yeah.
the truth.
And I can't change it, And so if I'm so focused on what I can't change and what I can't control, it's going to be a lot more difficult to cope with and to manage than just sort of realizing it's what it is. Let's
That's
find the benefit in all of this,
right.
and get through it.
Right. And as the kids grow a little bit, and are there other unique challenges that come into play? I mean, you right off the bat, newborns are just hands, down. There's lots of new challenges there. But as they grow, toddlerhood to, school age and stuff, are you seeing other unique challenges that working moms have and struggle with?
Yeah, well, I think really, when I think about challenges that working moms have, I honestly feel like it really comes down to the pressures and the expectations that we feel from society, that we put on ourselves. Once upon a time, a long time ago, the expectation was that men would go out and work and women would stay home and take care of the kids and take care of the homes. And now so many women are working outside of the home. And although there do seem to be have been some shifts like with those societal expectations, I don't necessarily think that the shifts have been proportionate.
Yeah.
And so there's this mentality that, we have to do really well at home and we have to do really well at work. And if we're not doing, and we have to look wonderful while we're doing it. And that if we're not able to be everything to everybody, and if we're not able to do everything perfectly, then maybe we're failing in some way. And that's just not true. That's just not the case. And so, and as I mentioned, part of it, those messages coming from society. And then also sometimes it's just that pressure that we are putting on ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I think really sort of managing that can be a really big struggle.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I could just think of just the pressures I put on myself, just like, oh, yeah, I can do it. Like
Mm-hmm.
just that mentality that, yeah, I can do it. And that, this is what my role is. And we don't necessarily, we add things to our plate, but we don't necessarily take them off. So I feel like that like also increases the pressure and the just the whole facade that we have to look good and we enjoy it. And, you know, we're just happy that we have those roles. And that's
Right.
not always the case either.
Right. Well, and then on top of that, too, I think a lot of times, especially with social media, we are constantly comparing ourselves to other people. We're seeing these other people who seemingly have it all together or doing it really well or doing it perfectly. And that just adds to the pressure. And then I also think that because of this pressure that we should be able to do all of this, with colors flying,
Yes.
with flying colors, is that we are I think a lot of times moms are not as willing or eager to ask for help or look for that support or lean on those supports. And so it can also feel very isolating, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I mean, when the facade and the idea is supposed to be like you have it all together,
Hmm.
why would you want to try to admit that you don't?
Right.
And so you
Absolutely.
hide that part, I really
Hmm.
feel. And so, I mean, and you're working with lots of working moms that are coming to you to like help me.
Hmm.
What are some things that a lot of women, moms are coming and just like help me do this? What are they
Hmm.
trying? What are they trying to get help with?
Well, I think so really, and this is a very overgeneralized answer,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think a lot of moms are really struggling with the balance. They're really struggling with juggling all the things, their roles. Again, there's just so much that they're dealing with. The expectations are so high. And a lot of times, it can lead moms to burnout in some cases. It can lead to these feelings of guilt, which are so, so common. The feelings of resentment, especially because our spouses don't necessarily have the same expectations, again, from society or from themselves or from us. I think that there can be some anxiety and some fears around, what is this going to do to my relationship with my child if I can't go to their school event or whatever it might be, and so it really brings up all of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And just this idea too that it's okay to prioritize themselves. It's okay to put their needs first. That's something that I think they have a really hard time with. It's okay to set boundaries and to ask for help and all of that.
So yeah, because it is really important to kind of put ourselves first. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard the analogy of the oxygen mask. It's really hard to help others when we don't have the energy to even take care of ourselves. And also with the boundaries, like what kind of strategies is like, oh, you learned lots of strategies. Is there certain ones that you help, working moms go through as far as like with expectations or boundaries or taking care of themselves? Can you give an example or give a little like how can somebody help themselves?
Yeah, and honestly, all of those things that you just mentioned, those are all things that I help with. And so those are all things that I talk to moms about. And so for starters, there are like simple strategies that they can do on a day to day in terms of time management sorts of things, prioritizing things like that.
Mhm.
One of the things that I help a lot of moms with is how to manage, like how to overcome the barriers of setting boundaries. And that's where more of the mindset shift stuff comes in because I think a lot of times A lot of times people will say, yes, I acknowledge that boundaries are good. They're a good thing to do. Sometimes you hear people talk about it feeling selfish, not always. And really, I just want to say that in my opinion, boundaries are not selfish. When people engage in selfish behaviors, they're really doing things, making decisions that are in their best interest at the expense of other people, or without really considering other people. And that's just really not what boundaries are about. They're not about the other person, they're about protecting ourselves. And I do think that a lot of times people, again, they struggle with boundaries. And a lot of times it's because of some fear or something going on mentally, right? They're either afraid of conflict, right? They're afraid of what might happen if they establish the boundary. Maybe they feel guilty. Maybe they're trying to, maybe they have people-pleasing behaviors or they're afraid of disappointing somebody,
Mhm.
and so that's where the mindset piece comes in. So they're the actual strategies of setting the boundaries that I help with,
Right.
and then
Right.
also helping them work through some of those things.
And I think that's like more of the key because I think, the how-tos seem pretty like, oh, pretty straightforward. This is, a lot of times. But
Hmm.
the just overcoming just the things that trip you up to even set the boundaries,
Hmm.
uncovering those might maybe some or, hidden fears about not being able to please others, like you said, or, and it's just those kind of things need to be tapped into. Otherwise, the how-tos aren't going to work at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, those strategies can be really great and they can be really helpful, but first we have to get out of our own way. First, we
Mhm.
have to be
Yes.
willing to actually do them and to put them into place.
Yeah, because it all goes in the mind because there's a lot of stuff going on up here in the mind about
Mhm.
when we approach things. And a lot
Mhm.
of times we're making assumptions, we're, kind of using past behavioral patterns, and we're using a lot of our emotions to drive our behaviors. And if you're sleep deprived, emotions are kind of going to go all over the place.
Yeah.
And you're going to be sleep deprived. New moms know, like, you're going to be
Mhm.
sleep deprived for like years. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
If we ever get out of it.
Oh my gosh, I know I mentioned before that my son wasn't sleeping through the night for 2 years, and he finally started sleeping through the night, but then he was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, so I feel like those, and then eventually, the nightmares started happening, and
Mhm.
their sleep is always a struggle.
Yeah, yeah. And let me tell you, that doesn't go away. I've got, I've got some that over the years is just like, oh yeah, you sleepwalk? Like, what? Like nightmares? Like,
Mhm.
what brings those on at different stages and ages, of development? It's just is, and so it's not just getting their sleep pattern. There's so
Mhm.
many other disruptions that can happen through that, and that can impact ourselves emotionally.
Mhm.
So, how is there a different set of like how you work with working moms on just their emotional stability and regulation?
Yeah, well, and again, it comes down to I always with all of the challenges that moms bring to me, I really look at them in these two different ways, so again, the practical strategies that they can do. So managing emotions, so talking about again, sort of that self-care and any sort of coping strategies, relaxation strategies, taking breaks, all of those kinds of things. How can you, what sorts of strategies can you use so that you are maybe prioritizing or getting
Mhm.
sleep in and things
Yeah.
like that. And then the other part is the mindset piece. And so
Mhm.
that's where we talk about, sort of focusing on these are the things that we have control over, and these are the things that we can change, and these are maybe the things that we can't change or we don't have as much control over. And so how can we work towards maybe again accepting sort
Mhm.
of some of those things that we don't necessarily like, and then work on shifting our mindsets around the things so that we can feel better.
Yeah, yeah, because it is just really taking a different perspective to what's
Yeah.
coming at us and saying,
Hmm.
okay, what is it that we can control? And
Hmm.
that's sometimes disheartening. I mean, I feel like because
Hmm.
it's like, nope, can't control that. Nope, can't control that.
Hmm.
Nope, can't control that.
Hmm.
What can I control? Is just like, oh, how you respond to it, a lot
Hmm.
of times. And you can choose. It's like you said before, it's like, oh, if that daughter getting up in the middle of the night, that can be my time.
Yeah, and I also think, a lot of times, so as we've been talking about, the mindset is so, so important. It really is very impactful in terms of how we feel, how we respond to things, how we behave, the choices we make, and all of that. But the thing is that, to manage that, the key is really reflecting on and becoming aware and understanding our thoughts so that we can
Mhm.
challenge them and then try to change them and replace them with other thoughts that are maybe more rational, because a lot of times without even realizing it we have thoughts that are irrational, so there's not evidence to support them.
Yeah.
So when a mom feels guilty, for example, a lot of times what's going on for her is this idea that either she's maybe doing something wrong or she believes she's let somebody down in some way, which a lot of times is not the case. It's not true. And so a lot of times when I talk to these moms, I'll sort of ask them these questions to get them thinking about it. And then a lot of times what ends up happening is that by changing the thoughts, not only does it bring the guilt down, but a lot of times we're able to sort of bring to light maybe other emotions that they're experiencing instead. So rather than feeling guilty, maybe what they're really feeling is disappointment or sadness that they're not able to go to their child's activity or whatever it might be. And coping with disappointment is different than coping with guilt. And so just sort of recognizing those things can be helpful too.
Yeah, because we have a tendency to go after certain emotions and we stick with our like handful of them, and
Hmm.
but they mean so many different things,
Hmm.
Oh, my kid is mad, but frustrated, like
Hmm.
annoyed, there's other words that can describe those, which might help, transition a little bit of the mindset to make it a little bit easier to, I guess, deal with or shift or, accept. Uh,
Hmm.
and so that's awesome.
Well, and also challenging this idea that them being mad or upset is a bad thing,
Right, right.
because a lot of times our kids are going to be mad about things, and that's okay. When my daughter was younger, one of the things that we would commonly do, our challenges always seem to happen around bedtime, and a lot of times that meant us taking away her favorite stuffed animal. And I will tell you, she was not happy when we did that, but it was okay. It was okay that she was upset in that moment because we had a larger goal.
Yep.
The goal being to try to help manage these bedtime problem challenges that we were having.
Yep.
So I think a lot of times sort of people struggle with this idea that if they're mad, if they're upset, that's a bad thing and that that's not okay. And so exploring that too.
Yeah, I think it's more of I just don't know how to handle it. Like
Yeah.
they don't have the words, they don't have they don't have the experience, they don't, they can't say, so they just act out. And
Hmm.
we're the ones that are interpreting the madness. you
Right.
know? And
Right. Yeah.
and we sometimes just like, oh, that's not a good thing. But then when we get upset ourselves, we're like, yes, like I have a right to be like this.
Yeah,
So do they,
absolutely.
you
Our
know?
feelings are valid and so are theirs.
Yes, yes. How can people find out more about what you do, get on your coaching list or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, I invite everybody to find me on Facebook. So I have Christi Gmyr Coaching. I also have a free Facebook group where I do these weekly lives where I'm sharing strategies and helping sort of navigate some of these challenges that people are experiencing. I also have a coaching program, where it's all of that and more that
Yeah.
people are welcome to join. And then my website, which is Christi Gmyr Coaching. So they can find all of that through there also.
Awesome. Awesome. A lot of good things. I'll put the links of those in the show notes so that people can easily grab those. And it's like, oh yeah, go check out the Facebook group because just weekly little tidbits. Like we just need daily, weekly reminders on what it is because inevitably we're having those kind of struggles at that time. And so
Mhm.
that's awesome because
Yeah.
we just need a regular just input that there's other ways that we can do things or other ways how we can think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if anybody is trying to, I don't remember if I mentioned this, I said Christi Gmyr Coaching. The group itself is called Thrive as a Career-Driven Mom, so they can search for that.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So yeah, it'll be in the show notes, but also just yeah, thrive as a career-driven mom. Look for that as a Facebook group. So thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Ashley, this has been great because it's just bringing back so many things of when my kids were younger, and I think I've already kind of graduated and kind of worked through, but it's still working through a lot of these things because as each age and stage kind of goes, there's new challenges. But
Mhm.
is there anything that you can like if you leave the listeners with? Is there a thought or a quote or anything that you would like to leave them with today?
Yeah, so I really love this quote by Jill Churchill. And she says, there is no way to be a perfect mother and a million ways to be a good one, which I think is just, I feel like it's right on, right on point with this idea that, we do not have to be perfect, sort of embracing this idea that good enough is good enough. Like we can still be great moms, we can still be great at our jobs, even if we don't get everything exactly perfect every single time, because perfection does not exist,
It
quite
doesn't.
frankly. It
It doesn't.
doesn't.
It's a moving target. It's like a mirage,
Yeah.
because once you hit something, it's just like, oh, there's something else. It's like there's always a higher peak. And so we got to give ourselves that grace that we can be great a million ways.
Hmm.
And our
Yeah,
kids really
absolutely.
do not want us to be perfect because then that is really hard to live up to.
Yeah, of course,
We have
absolutely.
to we have to admit that we're wrong sometimes so that they can learn.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you make a good point too, right? Our kids learn from what they see from us, and so by modeling these things, we're showing them that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be perfect. Like it's all okay.
Yeah, we don't have to have it all together because
Hmm.
we can work through it together and we'll become better people for it.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great conversation and hopefully a reminder to all the working moms out there. You are doing a great job. Just keep it up. You want to learn a little bit more, go check out Christi's Facebook group, Thrive as a Career-Driven Mom. Check out her coaching skills and her programs and strategies, and just really give yourself credit.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for having me. As I said, I'm so honored to be here talking to you today. And yes, if anybody is looking for help or support around any of those things, I welcome them to come join me.